course, I also thank you. There will be some words of farewell by, I do not see him, but Wolfgang is around.
Yeah.
Oh, he is. He's hidden. Oh, he's hidden. So I think that, yes, we leave. He will give some conclusions, and then we are done.
So, thank you very much for having the patience being with us until this afternoon. I have the easy task to conclude this session. It will take me only 2 hours. I hope I find what I just wrote. I don't. So this is part of the 2 hours. So, I wanted to start. It disappeared. So give me please 20 seconds, I will have it. It will not take 2 hours, and if I don't find it, it will be even very brief. So Ralph Dahrendorf wrote 20 years ago.
You have this wonderful book, you know.
I have helped myself. So, no, it's just listen to me, and that's fine. 2 decades ago, Ralph Dahrendorf wrote his memoirs about the first half of his life. He titled the book Über Grenzen. So it is about borders, but it's also transcending borders. And it's quite interesting if you look into the table of content. He had chapters about the journalist, the politician, the poet over his time in Rome, the sociologist, and the scholar, der Gelehrte. Later, Ralph Dahrendorf became famous of being a Europeanist, an institutionalist, an institution builder, and a grand European liberal in the tradition of Isaiah Berlin, and to some extent of Karl Raimund Popper as well. This tells you that freedom, liberties, equal liberties especially, became the normative anchor of his thinking, which indeed again and again transcended borders, intellectual, political, and geographical borders. Although liberty trumped equality, it was at least due to meeting T.H. Marshall at the London School of Economics, which let Ralph Dahrendorf link freedom to social cohesiveness. We were talking about this during the 2 days. So equal respect and concern was one of his normative orientations. I will give you very selectively and very briefly some of the thoughts, the findings, the questions we raised and responded to during these 2 days. We started with this wonderful speech of Timothy Garton-Ash, and it reminded me that we have somebody here, a grand European intellectual, who is about to step into the large shoes of Sir or Lord Ralph Dahrendorf. And his central and crucial topic is freedom as well. His last book is Freedom of Speech, and this is a very wonderful collection of essays. And we started then with the first panel talking about nation state and democracy, and here again the big question I don't want to answer here, and there are different responses as you may remember. The question is simply, is democracy possible and necessary beyond the nation state? Certainly we cannot go back to the nation state, but if we assume, and we have empirical evidence, that the supranational sphere is much more difficult to democratize, we have at least to keep the nation state as a major player in a global society as well. And Ralph Dahrendorf was in favor of keeping the representative institution of democracy on the nation state, and he admonished us that we should not simply try to transfer nation-state institutions up to the level of supranational regimes and supranational political decision-making. One of the problems we discussed, Ralph Dahrendorf was hinting at, is how can we preserve accountability? Or somebody has put, I think it was Calypso, this sketch where the people were calling them on a rock, can you hear me? This is accountability, and this is certainly something which is already difficult to achieve in the nation state, but it's even more difficult to achieve in at the supranational level. But we cannot regret, or we cannot deny that we have to find solution, because as I have said, and as many others say, and Michael Zürn would say, this has been the mark of the 20th century, and we are going to live in different times. The role of social solidarity was stressed, and social capital, and the dilemmatic situation that we are living now in more heterogeneous society, in bracket, which is good, but on the other hand, they are more difficult to govern, and we are losing those producers of a certain political cohesiveness on the party system, catch-all parties, which played a dominant role in the second half of the 20th century, exactly at the time where we would need them more than, let's say, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the production of social capital, of political capital, of creating a sense of belongingness of the citizens to the European level, but also to the nation state is important. Very interesting, and I think this will be one of the topics which will come up more powerfully than it has been in the past. The power of the green movement, as it was called here in the discussion, and the question, how dangerous and how positive is it for democracy if they tell us time is up? You have to speed up democratic procedures. And here again, the question is, how can we speed it up without losing democratic content and democraticness of these institutions? So this is something, it's quite interesting if you discuss this with your students. The students are in the majority prepared to give up slow democratic decision-making for the right decisions, and science will tell us anyway which are the right decisions. So there is a majority. Very interesting then, civil society. Christina and John are still here. John Keane, he did it differently this time, and new things came up, but the core is still an invention of John, and this is the monitoring function of civil society. This is not the invention, but the term monetary democracy is something which is used quite often in the international debate. So we have to understand civil society as a control of those who are in power, but not of a civil society supporting the government. And this was a topic of Christina, and talking about Poland, but especially about Hungary, and where she argues Fidesz. By the way, Fidesz could be, at least in social strata term, one of the last catch-all parties in Europe, tragically to say. Christina is talking about the reconceptualization of civil society, transforming it into a kind of sphere of collateral organization. It reminded me to the Leninist concepts, what these collateral organizations have to do. And it reminds me of the following nice, very brief anecdote. I was asked in 2002 by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, probably the only one where I did something with the Adenauer Foundation, and the motive was I haven't been in Moscow at that time. And the reason why they invited me is because there was the Pan-Russian Congress, Foundational Congress of Civil Society. 2002, the good friend of Putin, Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor of Germany, told Putin, you have to take pay attention to civil society. And Putin transformed it in a pan-Russian Congress in founding the Russian civil society. So this seems to be an early parallel to your formidable Prime Minister. Interesting then on Eastern Europe. Ivan Krastev did somebody what we German, I have to say, probably would not so easily dare to put demographic change as the core problem of the political and democratic development. It is the demography, stupid, was more or less the slogan above it. So he argued the most eminent problem of Eastern Europe is emigration. The people, the well-skilled, trained people are leaving Eastern Europe, and not at least Germany, what Germany sometimes does with the refugee question as well. At least the governing elites tried to legitimize it. Germany is attracting the well-educated people from East European countries, and they are leaving the countries, and this will be a problem then not only for Eastern Europe, it's becoming a problem for the West European countries as well. Katharina Blum responded, it's not demography, it's the economy, stupid, and we're talking about the conservative turn in Russia, and Radek Markovsky brought in this wonderful paradigm, or the proposal to substitute the Homo Sovieticus as the main obstacle for further democratization in Europe by the Homo Catholicus, who is the biggest obstacle to democracy in Eastern Europe. It would be quite interesting how Dahrendorf would have responded to your new paradigm. European integration, so there are only two parts left. Calypso Nicolaides of St. Anthony's in Oxford favored the emergence of an European democracy. This is an idea which is up in the air now for 2 decades. I do think this is an normatively spoken wonderful ideas to take advantage of the overlapping identities from the local level across the national up to the supranational level. However, still, one of the questions is how can we strengthen these different overlapping identities without having collisions among them. And Ralph Dahrendorf, if you remember, Ralph Dahrendorf was talking about this new cosmopolitan global class, and this global class will not see a prominent or foresee a prominent role of the nation-state level, and this is, so to say, something where the normative idea becomes rather inconsistent or may become inconsistent in itself. And we learned from Helmut Anheier that Danny Roderick's trilemma is not so new. It was pre-formulated by Ralph Dahrendorf, and since Germany has become the country of hunting plagiarists, so it would be quite interesting whether Danny Roderick has quoted Ralph Dahrendorf, but this is probably a very German remark. Michael Zürn, and again, this is an ongoing controversy and fruitful debate our 2 departments have here at the WZB. How can we solve this problem that the addressees of political decisions cannot understand themselves as the authors of these political decisions in a world where you have so many externalities of powerful states? And we were discussing whether the United States or the US election should be a global election, because in some countries decisions made in the United States are more important for the country than the nation-state political decision. However, this is, as we learned, certainly not the solution to the problem. Education, and here I learned while I was writing here my comments and while I was listening with one ear to it, and what I found completely convincing, I think Claudia Buchmann brought this to the fore. Education as a civil right completes Ralph Dahrendorf's definition of equal liberties. Equal access to education is a precondition for equal participation in politics. So this is full in line, certainly, with Ralph Dahrendorf. And still, we learned that it is a major remaining problem, this equal access and equal opportunities in our societies, from the US to Germany. And what maybe I have overheard it, certainly we can learn from Scandinavia or the Nordic countries. And I remember that Gösta Esping Andersen was once writing, I hope I recall it correctly, 10 or 15 years ago, if all the European member states would implement the Finnish system of preschooling, which is so important, as you have pointed out, it would cost 1.2% of the GDP. It's not so tremendously, and this is something we at least can take as a figure to approach, but at present we are discussing more, that we have to contribute 2% of the GDP to NATO. This is, so to say, our discussion we have now. Barbara Ischinger, I did not know that she had a prominent role in the PISA studies, and the PISA studies always are admonishing political elites and the German society that the Bildungskatastrophe, the catastrophe of German education, is not over. Jutta Almendinger mentioned, if I understood her well, and I wanted to understand her this way, that the federal system or the competencies of education so much loaded on the single states is certainly not the best solution for our educational system. It creates and builds up obstacles for a better education. Most of the financial resources are still with the federal government and not with a single state government. I come to the end. Helmut Anheier and myself, it was the initiative of Helmut, are planning a special issue of Global Perspective. This is the title of a new, supposed to be prominent journal, especially an e-journal, and we will come back to some of you for a special issue. So there is, as it is in the educational sector, there is work ahead for you, but this is probably a very good place to publish the findings of this conference. So the last sentence I have written here is, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for staying here until the end. I think it was very worthwhile to have this conference here, and so have a good trip back home or back to the desk here in the WCP. Thank you very much.
Well, I actually have the last word, and the last word is a big, big thank you to all four organizers, and because only Wolfgang Merkel is here, I think, so nobody from the foundation is here anymore, right? From Mercator? No. Is anyone here from the LSE? From the entrance? No. So? Okay.